Power has a scent in the capital city of Eldoria. It's a mix of old parchment, expensive perfume, and spilled wine. For the servants of the Obsidian Palace, it's a scent you learn to fear. For Emily Vance, scrubbing flagstone floors on her hands and knees, it was the air she breathed. She was no one a ghost in the hallowed halls of the kingdom of Æthelgard, the daughter of a disgraced academic. Above her gods of politics and intrigue strode by none more formidable than Duke Alistair Beaumont. They called him the King's Shadow, a man whose heart was said to be as cold and sharp as the winter frost on the palace gates. This is the story of how a woman with nothing but her wits and a hidden heritage brought that unshakable man and the entire kingdom to his knees. The Obsidian Palace was a masterpiece of Gothic arrogance. Its spires clawed at the perpetually grey sky of Eldoria, its gargoyles sneering down at the city below. For Emily Vance, who had arrived 3 months prior, it was a beautifully crafted prison. Each morning before the sun had a chance to dilute the darkness, she would rise from her straw pallet in the servants' quarters, the chilblains on her fingers, a stinging reminder of her new reality. She wasn't born to this life. Emily was the daughter of Professor Aldrich Vance, a man whose mind had been a library of forgotten histories. They had lived a modest but comfortable life in a small university town surrounded by books and the warm aroma of her mother's baking. Then came the accusation. Treason. Seditious writings, suggesting a limit to the king's divine right. The evidence was a single forged letter. Professor Vance was stripped of his titles, his assets seized, and he died of a broken heart in a debtor's prison within the year. Her mother followed soon after. At 19, orphaned and penniless, Emily sold the last of her valuable possessions, a locket containing her parents' miniatures, for a place as a scullery maid. Through sheer diligence and the rare gift of literacy, which she wisely concealed, she was promoted to a housemaid, tasked with cleaning the palace's western wing. The western wing belonged to Duke Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood. He was a man spoken of in hushed, fearful tones. As the king's spymaster and most trusted adviser, his influence was a silent, creeping vine that wrapped around the throne itself. It was said he could hear a whisper from 100 paces and could ruin a man with a single, well-placed word. Emily's first proper encounter with him was on a Tuesday. She was polishing the black marble floor of his private study, a room so saturated with the smell of leather and ink that it made her ache with nostalgia. She was on her hands and knees, working the beeswax into the stone, her movements small and efficient, designed to make her invisible. The door opened without a sound. She didn't look up, merely shifted to the side, her body curling into itself. Heavy, purposeful footsteps strode across her freshly polished section. She heard the rustle of papers, the soft clink of a decanter. "You missed a spot," a voice said, low and resonant like stones grinding together. Emily froze. She had been so careful. Her gaze darted to the floor. By the leg of his enormous mahogany desk there was indeed a faint smear. Humiliation burned her cheeks. "My apologies, Your Grace. I will see to it at once." She didn't dare look at him, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. She could feel his gaze on the crown of her head, heavy and analytical. He wasn't just looking. He was assessing, dissecting. "What is your name?" he asked. The question was not conversational. It was an interrogation. "Emily Vance, Your Grace." A beat of silence. It stretched for an eternity. "Vance." He repeated the name, tasting foreign and insignificant on his tongue. "See that it doesn't happen again." The footsteps retreated. The door clicked shut. Emily let out a breath. She didn't realize she was holding her heart hammering against her ribs. She had survived. She had been noticed, however briefly, and survived. In the Obsidian Palace, that was a victory. She scrubbed the offending spot with a frantic energy, her mind racing. He was just as they said, cold, imperious, utterly unapproachable. His face, which she had only glimpsed in profile, was all sharp angles and severe lines framed by dark hair. There was no softness in him. He was a weapon in human form. Later that week, a commotion echoed through the servants' corridors. A young maid, Clara, no older than 15, had accidentally spilled a tray of wine on the Viscountess of Northgate's gown during a soiree. The Viscountess was demanding the girl be dismissed without references, a sentence that meant starvation or the workhouse. Emily found Clara weeping in the laundry room, her small body shaking. "She said I was clumsy and stupid," Clara sobbed. "She said I did it on purpose to ruin her evening." Emily's heart ached for the girl. She knew the Viscountess was a cruel woman who enjoyed wielding her petty power, but she also knew that direct confrontation was suicide. She needed a different approach. Remembering her father's lessons on rhetoric and observation, she thought not of the injustice, but of the solution. She sought out the head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, a stern but fair woman. "Mrs. Gable." Emily began, her voice steady and respectful. "Regarding Clara, I was polishing the silver in the anteroom when the incident occurred. The floor had just been waxed by the footman. I saw the Viscountess's own son, young Lord Harrington, jostle the table where the drinks were placed. I believe the tray was unsteady before Clara even touched it. It was a lie, but a plausible one, a fabrication built on a foundation of truth. The floors were always being waxed, and Lord Harrington was a known troublemaker." Mrs. Gable looked at Emily, her brow furrowed. It was highly unusual for a maid to speak up to offer a defense for another. It was a risk. "Are you certain of what you saw, girl?" "I am, ma'am," Emily said, meeting her gaze without flinching. "It was an unfortunate accident, not negligence." Mrs. Gable was silent for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. "Very well. I will speak to the steward. The Viscountess will be compensated for the cleaning of her gown. The girl will be given a stern warning and assigned to kitchen duties for a week. Now get back to your work." Clara was saved, but Emily had made a miscalculation. She had assumed her cleverness would go unnoticed, a small ripple in a vast ocean. She was wrong. The Duke of Blackwood's study overlooked the very anteroom where the incident had taken place. He had not been there, but his network of eyes and ears was everywhere. The steward, a man who owed his position to the Duke, reported everything, including the quiet, well-spoken maid who had concocted a story to save a friend. That evening, as Emily was turning down the Duke's bed, he entered the room unexpectedly. She curtsied low, her body rigid. "The Vance girl," he stated, not as a question. He stood by the fireplace, watching her. "You have a clever tongue." I don't know what you mean." "Your Grace," she stammered, her mind racing. "Don't you—" He took a step closer. He was taller than she'd realized, and his presence seemed to consume all the air in the room. "You fabricated a convincing narrative to protect the other girl. You identified a plausible scapegoat, leveraged the housekeeper's sense of fairness, and resolved the situation with minimal fuss, an impressive display of strategic thinking, wasted on a housemaid." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. He knew. He had seen through her lie completely. She expected to be dismissed, thrown out into the streets. "I apologize, Your Grace," she whispered, her eyes on the floor. "I only wished to help her. The punishment was not just." "Justice." He scoffed the word, a bitter taste. "Justice is a luxury. In this palace there is only power, and the lack of it. You girl have none." and yet you acted. Why?" She finally lifted her head, her green eyes meeting his piercing grey ones. For a moment, the servant girl fell away, and the daughter of Aldrich Vance spoke. "Because no one else would, and because leaving injustice to fester, no matter how small, allows it to grow." A flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. It wasn't anger, it wasn't amusement. It was interest, a geologist's interest in a strange and unexpected fossil. "My father," she added, her voice, dropping to a near whisper, "taught me that." "Your father," Alistair said, his voice flat. "The disgraced academic. He taught you to lie. He taught me to seek the truth." Emily countered a spark of defiance in her tone. "And when the truth is not enough to create a better outcome." The corner of Duke Beaumont's mouth twitched a minuscule movement that could hardly be called a smile. "A dangerous philosophy. Leave the room. And from now on you will report to my valet, Thomas. You are being reassigned. You will serve me and only me." As Emily backed out of the room, her heart a frantic drum, she didn't know if she had been punished or rewarded. She only knew that she had stepped out of the shadows and into the direct, unblinking gaze of the most dangerous man in Ethelgard. Being assigned to the Duke's personal staff was like moving from the frozen tundra into the heart of a volcano. The work was more demanding, the standards impossibly high, and the proximity to power was a constant nerve-wracking pressure. Emily was no longer just cleaning his rooms. She was organizing his papers, serving his private meals, and ensuring his sanctuary remained precisely as he liked it, ordered, silent and secure. Her new position gave her unparalleled access. While dusting the Duke's library, she saw the maps of troop movements and the ledgers of the kingdom's finances. While serving his late-night tea, she heard snippets of hushed conversations with captains of the guard and shadowy figures who melted away before she entered. She was a ghost with a duster, and she absorbed everything. Duke Alistair Beaumont watched her. He said little, his commands clipped and impersonal, but his eyes followed her every move. He tested her. He would deliberately misplace a book and see if she returned it to its correct shelf based on his complex cataloging system. She always did. He would leave a coded message on his desk, a simple substitution cipher, to see if her gaze lingered. It never did, but the next day she would use a word from the decoded message in a passing, respectful comment to his valet, a signal that she had understood. He never acknowledged these small victories, but a strange, unspoken understanding began to form between them. It wasn't warmth, and certainly not kindness. It was a mutual recognition of intellect, a silent game of chess played across the chasm of their stations. One evening he was reviewing intelligence reports, a deep scowl etched on his face. The king was pushing for a new trade treaty with the neighboring kingdom of Valoria, a treaty heavily favored by the merchant guilds, and championed at court by the beautiful and ambitious Lady Genevieve de Valois. "They are fools," Alistair muttered to himself, scanning a document. "The Valorians will use this treaty to flood our markets and cripple our artisans." Emily, refilling his inkwell, remained silent. But she had seen the ledgers. She knew the artisans in the southern provinces were already on the brink of revolt due to high taxes. The Valorian treaty would be the final spark. "Your Grace," she said, her voice soft but clear, "forgive my presumption." He looked up, his grey eyes narrowed. "Speak." The southern provinces, the tapestry weavers and blacksmiths. Their guild representatives petitioned the crown for tax relief 2 months ago. The petition was denied. They feel the king has abandoned them for the wealthier merchants of the capital. She paused, choosing her next words with extreme care. A new treaty that benefits the merchants at their expense might be seen not just as an economic hardship, but as a deliberate insult. Alistair stared at her, his expression unreadable. She had connected two disparate pieces of information, the high-level treaty negotiations and the low-level provincial discontent, into a single cohesive threat. It was a conclusion his own analysts had not yet reached. "How do you know this?" he demanded. "While cleaning the archives, I saw the petitions filed away. The dates were marked." She replied a half-truth. She had actively sought them out after hearing whispers among the footmen, some of whom had family in the south. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "You see what others do, not Emily Vance." He did not thank her. He simply turned back to his papers and said, "Leave me." But the next day, Emily heard that the Duke had ridden out heading south. And 2 weeks later, the king announced a surprising, temporary suspension of the Valorian treaty talks, citing a need to re-evaluate internal economic stability. The court was stunned. Lady Genevieve de Valois was reportedly furious. Emily knew she had played a role, however small. The knowledge was a dangerous thrill. She was more than a servant. She was a pair of eyes, a whispering voice in the ear of the king's shadow. This new dynamic did not go unnoticed. Lady Genevieve, a woman as sharp as she was beautiful, had been courting the Duke for months. A marriage to him would solidify her family's power and give her immense influence. She saw his growing reliance on a mere serving girl as an affront. Her attacks began subtly. A spilled cup of hot tea that just happened to scald Emily's arm. A misplaced sapphire earring that was found in Emily's apron pocket. A situation only resolved when the Duke intervened with a bored, dismissive wave, stating he had seen it fall there himself. The true conflict came during the annual autumn gala. Emily was helping in the kitchens, her hands raw from washing hundreds of delicate crystal goblets. Suddenly, she was summoned to Lady Genevieve's private chambers. Lady Genevieve was seated at her vanity resplendent in a gown of emerald silk. 2 of her ladies-in-waiting stood behind her, their expressions smug. "The housemaid," Genevieve said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I require a new scent for my handkerchief. My personal perfumer is unavailable. I am told you have clever hands." She gestured to a table covered in dozens of small glass vials containing essential oils, rose, lavender, sandalwood, bergamot. It was a test. A perfumer's art was complex. Creating a balanced, pleasant scent required knowledge and skill. A common servant would surely fail creating a foul-smelling concoction and making herself a laughing stock. Emily looked at the vials. Her mother had been an amateur botanist and had taught her the basics of blending scents. It was another piece of her old life, a memory she treasured. She met Genevieve's malicious gaze, and a quiet determination settled in her. She did not speak. She simply moved to the table. Her hands, red and chapped from lye soap, moved with a surprising delicacy. She ignored the most potent florals, the obvious choices. Instead, she picked up a vial of vetiver, its scent earthy and grounding. She added a drop of cedarwood for strength, and then a single surprising drop of grapefruit for a sharp, clean brightness. She mixed them not in the ostentatious way of a court performer, but with the quiet efficiency of a scholar. She dipped a fresh handkerchief into the blend and presented it to Lady Genevieve. Genevieve took it, her smile tight, and brought it to her nose. Her smile vanished. The scent was unexpected. It was not a cloying floral bouquet fit for a simpering debutante. It was complex, elegant, and sophisticated. It smelled of confidence and earth and a hidden sharp wit. It was in its own way a perfect reflection of the woman Genevieve aspired to be. To admit she liked it would be to admit the servant had talent. To claim it was foul would be a transparent lie. "Adequate," Genevieve clipped, tossing the handkerchief onto her vanity. "You may go." As Emily turned to leave, Genevieve's voice, now laced with venom, stopped her. "A clever little rat can learn many tricks in a palace. But remember Emily Vance. No matter how clever a rat becomes, it is still just a rat. And this palace has 1,000 traps." Emily walked back to the servants' quarters, her heart steady. The threat was clear. She had been warned. But as she passed the Duke's study, the door was slightly ajar. Alistair stood inside, looking out the window, but she knew he had heard. She saw his reflection in the glass, and for a fleeting moment, the cold mask of the spy master slipped. In its place was a look of profound, calculating anger. The serpent had shown her fangs, but in doing so, she had revealed herself to the dragon. The game had just begun. The Duke's protection, Emily soon learned, was a double-edged sword. It was a shield that kept Lady Genevieve's more overt aggressions at bay, but it was also the bars of a gilded cage. He began to summon her more frequently, not for menial tasks, but for conversation. He would ask her opinion on political treatises, on historical precedents, on the motivations of the court's key players. Their meetings were always framed as master and servant. She would stand while he sat. She would pour his wine while he spoke. But the content of their discussions was that of equals. He was unraveling her past, piece by piece. He asked about her father, not about the treason, but about his work. Professor Vance argued that the Crovian dynasty fell not from invasion, but from a collapse in their grain distribution network. He stated one evening, watching her reaction over the rim of his wine glass. He believed that true power lies not in armies, but in logistics. Emily replied, her voice filled with a quiet pride. "A hungry populace is loyal to no king. A simplistic view," Alistair countered, probing. "A fundamental one," she retorted before remembering her place and adding, "Your Grace." Alistair found himself looking forward to these intellectual spars. Emily's mind was a refreshing anomaly in a court filled with sycophants and schemers. She didn't flatter him. She challenged him. She saw the world through a different lens, one untainted by years of political maneuvering and cynicism. He began to notice other things too. The way a stray curl of her auburn hair would escape her servant's cap, the intelligence that shone in her green eyes, the quiet grace of her movements that spoke of a gentle upbringing. This growing intellectual intimacy began to bleed into something more perilous. One night, while working late, he cut his hand on the sharp edge of a letter opener. It was a minor wound, but bled profusely. Emily, who was there to stoke the fire, acted without thinking. She rushed forward with a clean cloth, taking his hand in hers to apply pressure. Her touch was warm and steady. His hand, which had signed death warrants and commanded men in battle, felt shockingly vulnerable in hers. He looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused hers smaller and reddened from work, and the vast chasm of their stations seemed to shrink to nothing. The air in the room grew thick, charged with an unspoken tension. Her scent, a simple mix of soap and starch, was more intoxicating than any of Lady Genevieve's expensive perfumes. Emily realized what she was doing and pulled back as if burned. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I overstepped." "No," Alistair said, his voice hoarser than he intended. "It was necessary." He did not dismiss her. She bandaged his hand in silence, her fingers trembling slightly. Neither of them spoke of the moment, but it hung between them, a fragile, shimmering thing. He, the Duke of Blackwood, the man who trusted no one, found himself wanting to trust her. and that terrified him more than any assassin's blade. His feelings did not escape the notice of Lady Genevieve. Her informant, one of the Duke's own footmen, reported the late-night conversations, the intellectual debates, the incident with the bandaged hand. Genevieve realized she was not just competing with a clever servant. She was competing for the Duke's genuine affection, a prize she had assumed would be won through political alliance, not personal connection. Her jealousy festered into a venomous obsession. If she could not remove Emily, she would have to uncover a weakness, something so damning the Duke could not possibly protect her. She dispatched agents to Emily's hometown, instructing them to dig into the life of the disgraced Professor Aldrich Vance. Meanwhile, Emily was pursuing her own quiet investigation. Her father had sworn his innocence to his dying day, claiming the treasonous letter was a forgery. He had been investigating corruption in the Ministry of Trade, specifically related to land grants awarded to noble families. He believed someone powerful had framed him to silence him. With her access to the Duke's archives, Emily began to search for any records from that period, 10 years prior. Late one night, hidden in a dusty, mislabeled folio of agricultural reports, she found it. It was a list of land grants approved by the king. One grant was for a vast, timber-rich estate on the northern border. It had been awarded to the House of Valois-Genevieve's family just 2 weeks after Emily's father was arrested. But that wasn't the damning part. Stapled to the grant was a memo from the royal cartographer, noting that the initial survey of the land had been commissioned not by the Crown, but by Professor Aldrich Vance. Her father hadn't just been investigating general corruption. He had been investigating the Valois family's illegal claim to that land. They hadn't just silenced him. They had profited directly from his ruin. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The woman who tormented her daily was the architect of her entire family's destruction. Rage, cold and pure, burned through her grief. She finally had a name, a face to attach to her pain. Genevieve de Valois. At that moment, the library door opened. It was Alistair. He saw the folio in her hands, the look of shock and fury on her face. "What have you found?" he asked, his voice low. She hesitated. To tell him would be to admit she had been using his archives for her own purposes. It was a betrayal of his fragile trust. But to keep it secret felt impossible, a weight too heavy to bear alone. It's about my father," she whispered, her voice breaking. She pushed the documents across the table towards him. He was investigating the Valois family. They framed him. Lady Genevieve's family destroyed mine. Alistair looked at the papers, his expression hardening into granite. He already knew the Valois family was ambitious and corrupt. But this was different. This was a direct link, a motive. He looked from the documents to Emily's face, pale and tear-streaked in the candlelight. He saw not a servant, but the last scion of a wronged house, a woman fighting for justice against an impossible foe. His hand reached across the table, not to take the papers but to cover hers. It was a gesture of solidarity, of protection, an unspoken promise. "They will not get away with it," he said, his voice a low vow. "I will not allow it." But even as he made the promise, he knew the danger they were in. Genevieve was not some petty courtier. She was a cunning political operator with powerful allies. To accuse her family was to declare war on a faction of the nobility, and a war fought in the shadows of the Obsidian Palace always claimed casualties. He had just put himself and his heart directly in the line of fire. Lady Genevieve's agents returned from their inquiries not with a weakness, but with a weapon. They discovered that Professor Vance had a cousin, a man named Marcus Thorne, who had fled to the rival nation of Brythnia after a failed merchant venture. Thorn was known to hold anti-monarchist sentiments. It was a tenuous link, but in the hands of a master manipulator, it was more than enough. Genevieve began her assault not with a direct accusation, but with a whisper campaign. Rumors started to circulate through the court. A new spy from Brythnia had infiltrated the palace, someone close to a high-ranking official. The whispers were vague, designed to create an atmosphere of paranoia and suspicion, an environment where a lie could take root and flourish. Alistair felt the shift in the political winds immediately. He doubled the palace guard and initiated his own counterintelligence operations, trying to find the source of the rumors. He knew, with a sinking certainty, that they were aimed at Emily. He warned her to be careful to trust no one. Their later-night meetings became less frequent, their conversations more guarded. The easy intimacy they had begun to share was replaced by the cold reality of their situation. Emily felt the change keenly. She was isolated, the Duke's protection now feeling more like a spotlight that made her a brighter target. The other servants, sensing danger, began to avoid her. She was alone. Genevieve chose the night of the king's birthday feast to spring her trap. It was the grandest event of the year. The entire court gathered in the great hall, a glittering spectacle of power and wealth. Alistair was seated at the high table next to the king, his position making it impossible for him to intervene without causing a massive scene. Halfway through the feast, the captain of the royal guard, a man secretly in the Valois family's pocket, strode into the hall. He went directly to the king, bowed, and spoke in a voice loud enough for the entire high table to hear. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. We have uncovered a spy in the palace, a traitor in communication with our enemies in Brythnia." A collective gasp went through the hall. The king, a man who feared betrayal above all else, paled. "A spy here. Who is it? Show me the evidence." The evidence was found in the servants' quarters, Your Majesty. The captain announced, his voice ringing with false authority. He gestured to two guards who came forward, holding a small, locked wooden box. In the possession of the personal maid to the Duke of Blackwood, the woman known as Emily Vance. Every head in the room turned towards Alistair. His face was a mask of cold fury, his knuckles white where he gripped the arm of his chair. He had been outmaneuvered. Genevieve had used the king's own guard, making it an official matter of state security, bypassing his authority as spy master. "Bring the girl forward," the king commanded. Emily was dragged into the hall, flanked by two guards. Her simple servant's dress was a stark contrast to the silks and jewels of the court. She looked terrified, but as her eyes found Alistair's across the cavernous room, she straightened her shoulders, a silent plea and a statement of defiance, all in one. "Open the box," the king ordered. The captain unlocked the box and pulled out a bundle of letters. "These letters, Your Majesty, are written in a simple code. They detail the Duke's movements, the palace defences, and weaknesses in our southern command. They are addressed to a Marcus Thorn, a known dissident living in Brythnia." He handed one to the king, who read it, his face growing darker with every word. "Is this your handwriting, girl?" the king demanded, his voice trembling with rage. Emily looked at the letter. The handwriting was a near-perfect forgery of her own. The code was a simple one her father had taught her as a child for fun. It was a detail so specific, so personal, that it felt like a violation of her very soul. Genevieve hadn't just framed her. She had stolen her past to do it. "It is not Your Majesty," Emily said, her voice shaking but clear. "I have never seen these letters before." "Liar!" Lady Genevieve cried, rising from her seat, a vision of righteous indignation. "Your Majesty, this is the daughter of the traitor, Aldrich Vance." Treason clearly runs in the blood. For months, she has been poisoning the Duke's ear, turning him against loyal subjects, no doubt feeding him false information from her foreign masters. It was a masterful stroke. She had not only framed Emily, but had also cast doubt on Alistair's judgment, suggesting he was either a fool or a co-conspirator. Alistair rose to his feet. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice dangerously calm. "This is a fabrication. The girl is loyal. I will vouch for her." "Vouch for her?" The king spat, turning his anger on Alistair. "You have allowed a viper into the heart of this palace, Beaumont. Your judgment is compromised. Captain, take her to the dungeons. She will be questioned thoroughly." The words struck Emily like a death sentence. The palace dungeons were a place from which few returned, and questioning was a euphemism for torture. The guards grabbed her arms, their grips like iron. As they pulled her away, her eyes locked with Alistair's one last time. She saw not the cold spymaster or the proud duke, but a man helpless and furious, a man watching something precious being torn from his grasp. Lady Genevieve met Alistair's gaze from across the room, a triumphant, venomous smile playing on her lips. She had not only removed her rival, but she had also isolated the Duke, reminding him and the entire court that in the Game of Thrones she was a queen, and he was not untouchable. As Emily was dragged down the cold stone steps into the darkness of the dungeons, the sounds of the feast fading above her, she felt a despair so profound it threatened to extinguish her spirit. She was trapped. The evidence was perfect. Her enemy was triumphant, and the one man who might have saved her was bound by his duty to the very king who had just condemned her. The serpent had struck, and the poison was coursing through the veins of the kingdom. The dungeon was a cold, damp hell. Emily was thrown into a small cell, the stone floor slick with moisture, the air thick with the smell of mildew and despair. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint torchlight that filtered through the grates of her cell door. Her fine-spun plan for justice, her burgeoning hope for a different life, had crumbled into dust. Above ground, Duke Alistair Beaumont was a caged lion. The king had confined him to his quarters, guards posted at his door, effectively stripping him of his power as spymaster. It was a public humiliation, a clear sign that his influence was on the wane. He was cut off from his network, from his agents, from any means of helping Emily. But Lady Genevieve and the king had underestimated the depths of Alistair's contingency planning. For years he had cultivated a ghost network, a handful of individuals completely unknown to the court, loyal only to him. His valet Thomas, a man who appeared meek and unassuming, was one of them. The elderly palace librarian Master Willem was another. Using a series of coded signals they had established long ago, a book left open to a specific page, a pattern in the delivery of his meals, Alistair sent his orders. Thomas was to investigate the captain of the guard, find his debts, his vices, his connection to the House of Valois. Master Willem was to scour the royal archives for anything related to the Valois land grant, looking for financial trails or discrepancies that Emily might have missed. Meanwhile, in her cell, Emily fought against the encroaching despair. They had not come to question her yet, leaving her to stew in terror. She knew it was a psychological tactic. She forced herself to think, to analyze the trap, as her father had taught her to analyze a historical problem. The forgery of her handwriting was too perfect. The knowledge of the childhood code was too specific. How could Genevieve have known these things? She retraced her steps. Genevieve's agents had gone to her hometown. They must have found something. Her father's old journals, his letters. She remembered the small leather-bound diary she had kept as a girl, filled with idle thoughts and practice sessions of the very code the letters used. She had thought it lost when their home was seized. They must have found it. But there was something else. The letters mentioned weaknesses in the Southern Command. That was specific intelligence. How would Genevieve have access to that Alistair kept such information under the tightest security? Unless someone in his own command was feeding her information. The pieces began to click into place. The captain of the guard wasn't just in Genevieve's pocket. He was her source. This was the final piece of the puzzle. Genevieve wasn't just trying to eliminate a rival for the Duke's affection. This was a full-blown conspiracy. By framing Emily, she discredited Alistair. With Alistair removed, her faction could push through the Valorian treaty. And the weaknesses in the Southern Command, the Valois family stood to gain immense wealth and power if a border conflict with Valoria were to break out a conflict they could manipulate for their own ends. Emily's ruin was merely the opening move in a much larger, more treasonous game. She had to get a message to Alistair. She bribed a young, sympathetic guard with the last thing of value. She had a small, intricately carved wooden button from her sleeve, a keepsake from her mother. "Give this to the Duke's valet, Thomas," she whispered. "Tell him the serpent has a forked tongue. One for the court, one for the barracks." Thomas delivered the cryptic message. Alistair understood immediately. The conspiracy was twofold, a courtly deception and a military one. It confirmed his suspicions about the captain of the guard. At the same time, Master Willem arrived with a discovery. Buried in the treasury accounts, he had found records of a large anonymous payment made to the Royal Forgery Department, the secretive office responsible for creating official documents from a bank known to be controlled by the Valois family. The payment was dated 1 month ago. Alistair now had all the pieces: the motive, the land grant, and the Valorian treaty. The method, a masterful forgery of Emily's handwriting and code, paid for with family funds. The accomplice, the captain of the guard, who both planted the evidence and supplied the military intelligence for the fake letters. The king had scheduled Emily's formal interrogation and sentencing for the following day in the throne room, intending to make a public example of her. It was to be Genevieve's ultimate triumph. It would be her undoing. Alistair sent his final command via Thomas. "The king loves theatrics. We shall give him a performance he will never forget." He then sent a formal, seemingly contrite message to the king. It said he accepted the king's judgment and wished only to be present for the sentencing, to witness the final dispensing of justice, and to publicly renounce the traitor who had fooled him. The king, pleased by Alistair's apparent submission, agreed. The stage was set. The next day, Emily was brought into the throne room in chains. She looked pale and thin, but her eyes burned with defiance. Lady Genevieve sat near the throne, a picture of grace and concern. The entire court was assembled. The king read the charges. "Emily Vance, you are accused of treason and espionage against the crown. The evidence is irrefutable. Have you any final words before I pass sentence?" "I do, Your Majesty," Emily said, her voice clear and strong, echoing in the silent hall. "I am innocent, and I am not the only one in this room who stands accused." Before the king could react, the main doors of the throne room swung open. Duke Alistair Beaumont entered not as a disgraced courtier, but as the king's shadow, flanked by 2 of his own elite guards. "Your Majesty," Alistair said, his voice like cold steel. "New evidence has come to light. We have a traitor in our midst, but it is not this woman." He looked directly at Lady Genevieve. Her mask of composure cracked a flicker of panic in her eyes. "This is an outrage," she declared, rising to her feet. "The Duke is compromised. He is trying to protect his pet." "Am I?" Alistair replied smoothly. He unfurled a scroll. This is a confession from the head of the Royal Forgery Department. It details a generous payment he received from the House of Valois to replicate the handwriting and a childhood code from a diary belonging to Emily Vance. A wave of shock rippled through the court. Furthermore, Alistair continued, his voice rising. The military intelligence in those letters could only have come from a high-ranking officer. An officer who, as my valet discovered, recently paid off enormous gambling debts with funds traced back to the same Valois bank. He snapped his fingers. His guards dragged the captain of the guard forward, who fell to his knees, his face ashen. "The captain has also confessed, Your Majesty," Alistair said. "He has admitted to planting the forged letters and to feeding sensitive information to Lady Genevieve de Valois. Information she intended to use to destabilize the southern border for her family's profit after the Valorian Treaty was signed." He turned his piercing gaze on Genevieve. "It was never just about a servant girl, was it, Genevieve? It was about removing me. It was about manipulating the throne. It was about treason." The word hung in the air, damning and absolute. Checkmate. Genevieve stood frozen, her beautiful face a mask of horror and fury. The trap she had so carefully laid for Emily had snapped shut on herself. The throne room was utterly silent, the assembled nobility like a forest of statues. Every eye was on Lady Genevieve, watching the collapse of a dynasty in real time. Her carefully constructed world of influence and intrigue had been dismantled in a matter of minutes. The king, his face a mottled canvas of fury and confusion, looked from the kneeling captain to the triumphant duke, and finally to the woman he had considered a jewel of his court. "Genevieve, is this true?" He stammered the question, more a desperate plea than an inquiry. For a moment, Genevieve seemed to crumble, but then the cornered serpent gathered herself for one last strike. "Lies!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. "All lies. This is his doing. The spy master's plot to seize power, using this gutter-born witch as his pawn. He has coerced these confessions. He is the traitor." But the accusation was hollow, desperate. The evidence was too complete, the logic of Alistair's unveiling too precise. He didn't even deign to respond to her outburst. He simply looked at the king and waited. The king's gaze fell upon Emily, still in chains, her face pale, but her expression steady. He saw not a witch, but a young woman who had endured the dungeon and faced down the most powerful noblewoman in the kingdom. He saw the truth in her eyes. His own expression hardened. The indecisive monarch was gone, replaced by the sovereign whose authority had been challenged. "Guards!" he thundered, his voice cracking like a whip. "Arrest Lady Genevieve de Valois. Seize all assets of the House of Valois, pending a full investigation into this treason. Throw her in the same cell her victim occupied." Genevieve let out an inhuman scream as the guards, her former pawns, grabbed her silk-clad arms. Her elegant facade shattered completely, revealing the snarling, power-hungry creature beneath. "You cannot do this. I am a de Valois. You will regret this, all of you." She raved as they dragged her from the throne room, her threats echoing down the marble halls until they were silenced by the heavy doors. The king sank back onto his throne, looking suddenly old and weary. He looked at Alistair, a mixture of gratitude and renewed respect in his eyes. "Beaumont, you have served the crown well this day. Your authority is fully restored." Alistair gave a stiff, formal bow. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Then he turned and walked directly to Emily. The court held its breath. He knelt before her. The Duke of Blackwood, the king's shadow, knelt on the floor of the throne room in front of a servant in chains. He took the key from a stunned guard and personally unlocked her manacles. The sound of the metal clicking open was the only sound in the vast hall. He rose to his feet, helping her to hers. He did not let go of her hand. "Your Majesty," Alistair said, turning back to the throne, his voice clear and unwavering. "This woman, Emily Vance, has done more than prove her innocence. Through her courage and intellect, she has uncovered a plot that threatened the stability of your entire kingdom. She has been wronged in the most grievous way imaginable." He paused, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "And she is the daughter of Professor Aldrich Vance, a man who, it is now clear, was a loyal subject of the crown, framed and murdered by the same traitors. It was a public declaration, a complete rewriting of history. Therefore," Alistair continued, his voice ringing with an authority that rivaled the king's own, "I ask that you not only grant her a full pardon, but that the name of Vance be restored, that her father be posthumously exonerated, and his titles and lands, which were illegally seized by the crown and absorbed by the Valois estate, be returned to her, his rightful heir." The audacity of the request was staggering. He was not asking for a reward for a servant. He was demanding the full restoration of a noble house. The king looked at the duke and the former housemaid standing hand in hand. He saw the unyielding determination in Alistair's eyes and the quiet strength in Emily's. He understood that this was not a negotiation. It was the future. "It shall be done," the king declared, his voice regaining its strength. "Let the royal scrivener draft the decree at once. The House of Vance is restored. All rise for Lady Emily Vance." A murmur swept through the court as one by one the nobles of Ethelgard, who, hours before, would not have glanced twice at her, rose to their feet in deference. Emily stood overwhelmed as the duke gently squeezed her hand. She was no longer a servant, a ghost in the palace. She was Lady Vance. Her family's name cleared her future her own. But as she looked at Alistair, she knew her future was inextricably linked with his. The unveiling was over, the traitors exposed. But the most shocking revelation of all was the one that now stood beside her. A proud, cold duke who had risked everything, not just for justice, but for her. The political game was over, but the far more complicated game of the heart was just beginning. The restoration of House Vance was swift and absolute. The small estate and townhouse that had been seized were returned to Emily's name, along with a formal apology from the crown. The court, ever attuned to the shifting tides of power, now flocked to her. Invitations to teas and soirees piled up on her desk. In the suite of rooms, Alistair had insisted she take in the palace until her own home was made ready. It was a dizzying transformation. One week she was scrubbing floors, the next she was being consulted on gown fabrics and managing household accounts. The servants who had once been her peers now bowed to her, their eyes a mixture of awe and fear. Only Clara, the young maid she had saved, treated her with the same unaffected warmth, a friendship that Emily cherished as a link to her former self. But the greatest change was in her relationship with Alistair. The strict boundaries of master and servant had been obliterated. There was no pretense left between them, only a raw, unspoken emotion that charged the air whenever they were near. Yet a new chasm had opened. She was now Lady Vance, a member of the nobility. He was the Duke of Blackwood. They were by the world's standards a suitable match. The very suitability of it felt like a cage of its own. Their private conversations were gone, replaced by public appearances, where every glance was scrutinized. The easy intellectual intimacy they had shared in the quiet of his study was lost in the glare of the ballroom. One evening, a month after the unveiling, Emily found him on the high balcony overlooking the palace gardens, the same gardens she used to weed. He was staring out at the moonlit city, the weight of the kingdom back on his shoulders. "Your Grace," she said softly, coming to stand beside him. He turned, a faint smile touching his lips. It was a genuine smile, one she had never seen before. It transformed his severe features, making him look younger, less burdened. "Alistair," he corrected her gently. "My name is Alistair." "Alistair," she repeated the name, feeling both strange and wonderfully familiar. "You seem troubled." "I am navigating a new political landscape." He admitted, his gaze returning to the city. One without the Valois faction as a convenient enemy. Peace is proving to be far more complicated than war. He paused. "And I am navigating this." He gestured vaguely between them. "I confess I am less skilled in these matters." Emily looked at her hands, which were now soft and manicured, no longer chapped and red. "I feel as though I am playing a part in a play," she confessed. "Lady Vance, I still expect to wake up to the sound of the rising bell in the servants' quarters." "You are not playing a part, Emily," he said, his voice low and serious. He turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "You are exactly who you were meant to be. I saw it from the very beginning. I saw the daughter of a brilliant scholar, a woman of courage and intellect trapped beneath a servant's cap." "What did you see?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "When you looked at me, I saw the truth," he answered simply. "In a court built on lies, you were the only truth I found. You challenged me, you advised me, you trusted me. You made me better." He hesitated, the proud Duke struggling with a vulnerability he had never before allowed. "Emily, I did not risk my position for justice alone. I didn't kneel before you in the throne room for the sake of politics. I did it because the thought of a world without you in it has become unbearable." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. This was the confession that mattered more than any wrung from a traitor in a dungeon. It was the surrender of the most fortified heart in the kingdom. "And I," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "saw a man burdened by duty who protected his kingdom and his king at the cost of his own happiness. A man who deserved to have someone protect him too." He raised a hand to her face, his thumb gently brushing away a tear. "The court expects me to make you a formal offer," he said. "An alliance of my powerful house and your restored one. A politically advantageous marriage." He shook his head slightly. "But I do not want an alliance, and I am not asking Lady Vance." He looked into her eyes, his own grey eyes, once so cold now, burning with a fierce, tender light. "I am asking Emily, the woman who taught me the meaning of justice and loyalty. The woman who captivated a proud, foolish duke. Will you marry me?" She didn't need to play the part of a lady. She didn't need to consider the political ramifications. She only needed to listen to her heart, which had been his since the moment he'd first looked at her and seen not a servant, but a soul worthy of notice. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Alistair, I will." He lowered his head and kissed her a kiss that was not about power or status, but about two people who had found each other in the shadows of a palace and had, against all odds, brought each other into the light. From the ashes of her past, a new dawn was breaking, not just for the House of Vance, but for the Duke who had learned to love, and for the kingdom that would be shaped by their extraordinary story. And so the story of Emily Vance, the servant girl who became a lady, and Duke Alistair Beaumont, the man who ruled a kingdom from the shadows, comes to a close. Their journey was one of courage in the face of impossible odds, a testament to the idea that intellect and integrity are more powerful than any title. It's a story that reminds us that love can bloom in the most unexpected of places, transcending class conspiracy and the gilded cages of society. Their union wasn't just a marriage. It was a partnership that would redefine the future of Ethelgard, proving that a nation's greatest strength lies in the character of its people, no matter their station. If their story of courage and forbidden love moved you, please take a moment to show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed it. Share this video with a friend who loves a grand historical romance, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales of history, drama, and romance that feel like they were torn from real life. Thank you for listening.